The leak of a draft Supreme Court opinion.
The Supreme Court.
The court that dark money built.
Breaking news at the Supreme Court.
The landmark Roe v. Wade case.
A woman's constitutional right to an abortion.
My body, my choice.
And Leonard Leo, who really is responsible for helping Trump fill the Supreme Court.
A Supreme Court decision with dramatic consequences. The justices ruling 5-4.
You look at the decisions like Shelby County that attacks voting rights, and then you look at the dark money cases like Citizens United. It's not just us.
The court is not in order. This is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and welcome to Making the Case. I am joined today by a new colleague who I came to admire immensely before he became a new colleague. First, when he was a prosecutor of a corrupt judge in a Senate impeachment. And I thought to myself, damn, that guy is a good lawyer. And then he came back with presidential impeachments. And my judgment about his legal talent was confirmed and even amplified given the pressure and visibility of that case. He was just as good, if not better, in that environment than he had been in the more private environment of the impeachment of Judge Porteous of Louisiana. And that individual with me here is Senator now Adam Schiff of California. Adam, I am thrilled that you are here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it is great to join you, and you're just bringing back memories of that Porteous trial, because I remember I had that exact impression of you being a great lawyer, because as you'll remember in judicial impeachments, unlike presidential ones, it's a hot bench. The senators who are the jury get to ask questions of the witnesses. And I remember Judge Porteous called as a character witness a state court judge who had been convicted of corruption. And his attorney, Jonathan Turley, didn't even bring it out. And before I could bring it out, I think you said, counsel, is this the same judge who himself was convicted of corruption? Don't you think you should have maybe brought that out yourself? And I thought, man.
Yeah, this was not Turley's finest hour. I think he has his finest hours on talk radio as opposed to actually in courtrooms like a real lawyer. So I'm delighted that you're here. And before you did all that, you were an assistant United States attorney, a federal prosecutor. So you're familiar with the background and the way in which prosecutors' offices work. And the first topic I want to talk about with you, because it touches both on the weaponization of the Department of Justice by the Trump administration and its war against clean energy for its fossil fuel industry donors. And that is what happened to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Congress passed a Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The funds were appropriated and obligated, and they were even sent out to a bank to be the repository for those funds, to be the fiscal agent as it was distributed out to the groups that qualified for grants. So in comes the Trump administration. They hate everything having to do with clean energy. They're total stooges for fossil fuel, so they decide they want to go after the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. But of course, it's already been appropriated. It's already been obligated. It's already been distributed. And it's way past the time for a president to do a veto. So the plot that they came up with was to pretend there was a criminal investigation, because they could then assert to the bank, hey, there's a criminal investigation into these funds. Don't distribute them. Freeze the money while we complete our criminal investigation. The problem, of course, was that there was no crime to investigate. They had to make the whole damn thing up. And when the politically appointed U.S. attorney, Ed Martin, went to his office to say, hey, I need you guys to put together an application to a court to freeze the order based on our criminal investigation, the career people, the professionals, said to him, gee, sorry, boss, there's no crime here. We don't have any allegation that would provide predication. What does predication mean, Adam, for people who don't know?
Well, you have to have some evidence before you can open an investigation. You can't just open an investigation because you want to or because something is a political target. And there was no predication here. There was no basis except that they wanted to stop this money from going out.
So the career staff pointed that out to the U.S. attorney, who, instead of backing off, responded by firing the career chief for the criminal division for having the temerity to describe what the law and facts were to him. And then he went on to try to round up somebody to sign the pleading with him. In your assistant U.S. attorney days, do you recall the U.S. attorney actually being the individual who signed many pleadings?
I don't remember anything like this. It may be the case that you would have a U.S. attorney nominally on a pleading as the head of the office. I even remember the circumstances where there was a really high-profile case where the U.S. attorney wanted to handle it personally. In the time I was there, it was an espionage case. But never for the reason that he couldn't get anyone else to do the case or he couldn't get anyone else to sign the pleading because they all had ethical issues with what was being proposed.
And even when a U.S. attorney did do a case, I did cases when I was U.S. attorney, there was always a career person with you in the case. Because
Absolutely.
Who knows, you could get pulled away any particular moment. You needed to have a career backstop person. So he went into the court trying to get this order all by himself with no career backstop because they knew this whole thing was a sham. And, of course, the magistrate judge did the job the magistrate judge is supposed to do and said, hey, there's no evidence here, and shot him down. How often does a U.S. attorney's office get shot down asking for a warrant or a freeze order?
Is so very rarely because the evidentiary burden is a pretty modest one. And if you can't even make that, then there's something really wrong. And judges do have a sense now and then that something is really amiss with a prosecution, and they certainly did in this case. And what was so striking to me when these allegations first came out, because that career attorney you mentioned, I think her name is Denise Chung, resigned rather than represent that there was a criminal case where there wasn't one. What was so striking to me is it came on the heels, as I remember, of the Eric Adams case in New York. So in that case, the Trump administration used the Department of Justice as a shield to protect the president's allies, in this case to protect this mayor of New York facing serious corruption charges. So why on earth would the president of the United States want to interfere in the prosecution of a Democratic mayor over serious corruption charges? Well, because he was useful to the president on unrelated policy. So they intervened. That was a serious, unprecedented violation of the Department of Justice, ethics, rules, procedures, everything.
But they were undoing a legit prosecution that had been through all of the preparatory hoops of internal review, grand jury review, judicial orders related to subpoenas and everything else. That was a full-on, by-the-books prosecution that they then undid, the reverse of the Washington, D.C. scenario, where there was nothing legit about the prosecution, but they stood it up to try to get access to the greenhouse gas fund.
Well, that's exactly it. And when the Adams case happened, I remember thinking, first of all, I've never seen anything like this, and what a heinous abuse of the process it is. They even admitted that there was no evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. They weren't questioning the evidence against the mayor of New York. They were dismissing it as basically a quid pro quo to get his help on unrelated policy. But even then, as egregious as that was, I remember thinking it could be worse. It could be not protecting, not shielding the president's allies. It could be using prosecution to go after the president's enemies, to initiate a prosecution where none was warranted. And then, of course, this environmental case where they did exactly that. And it didn't stop with that. We've now seen the president direct and the attorney general initiate an investigation into Christopher Krebs, who was the head of this cybersecurity and information security agency.
Who you and I remember coming to Congress to testify very often in the secure compartmented intelligence facility, the SCIF, about the risk to that election. And he was the Trump administration's point person on election security. And he was their guy, but he was also perfectly able. And he was the one who said there was not fraud in the election in any significant way.
Exactly. And his even greater sin was to say that it was one of, if not the most secure election in our history. This was the 2020 election, which, of course, Trump lost and could never forgive Christopher Krebs for speaking the truth about the election. So he's no longer working for the federal government. The president's not in a position to harm him that way. So what does the president of the administration decide to do? They decide they're going to announce an investigation into him. Over what?
By name.
By name. And over what we're not really sure. And it won't succeed because he was doing his job and doing it quite well. But it will cause Christopher Krebs to have to devote time and money and resources to protecting himself. And I think, if I remember correctly, it did force him to leave whatever his private sector employment was because they were afraid it would hurt the clients of his business. So it has already had an economic impact.
As we all recall, one of the refrains of the Trump campaign was that the Bidens had weaponized the Department of Justice against them, when in fact, if anything, the Department of Justice under President Biden was too much milquetoast rather than too much of a marauder. And but there's something about these guys that they will often telegraph what they intend to do with the accusations that they make about the other side. So they will talk about how DOJ has been weaponized against them as the preview to their own weaponization, their own planned, intended weaponization of the Department of Justice.
Well, okay, this brings up a bone I have to pick with you, but also a question I have with you. The bone I have to pick with you is, as our second most senior member of the Judiciary Committee, the questions go to you before they ever get to me as the junior most, and you always make the point I want to make, and that's the bone I have to pick with you. And I was sitting in, I don't know what—
Seniority has its privileges.
Well, I was sitting in, I don't know what hearing it was, because we've had so many along these lines, when I was beyond my endurance because Republican after Republican on the committee was talking about the horrible weaponization of the Department of Justice under that well-known partisan Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
Who, as you point out, if we had any critique of it, was that he erred so much on the side of insulating the Justice Department in every way that it conferred a kind of immunity on some of the most significant offenders on January 6th, including the president, who didn't get investigated until a year after Congress had already done its investigation. But I remember after listening to Republican after Republican talk about the horrible weaponization, this imagined weaponization, reaching beyond my endurance point, and I was going to make a long point about this when you did. And it's so effectively that there wasn't much left for me to say except, what he said. But my question is this, because I often get asked this question from my constituents, and I have a slightly different take on it now, and I'm curious about your take. And that is, I'm often asked, do the Republicans really believe what they're saying? Or do they confess to privately that it's just for show? And on the issue of weaponization by the Biden administration of the Justice Department, which is a complete fallacy, in the past, I really had the sense that as I listened to my Republican colleagues make this point endlessly, that they knew they were putting on a show and didn't really believe the show they were putting on, but they felt they needed to put on the show anyway. But now I have to say, listening to some of my colleagues, it feels like either they're a lot better actors than they used to be, or now they really believe it. They have said it so often, they have internalized the argument, now they really believe it. So I'm curious, you have much more experience with our colleagues here in the Senate than I do. Do they believe this weaponization narrative, or is this just a show?
I think they've conditioned themselves to believe it. They all say it, so there's this echo chamber effect. Trump demands it. You are out if you admit the possibility that the investigations of him that were headed for prosecutions of him were anything other than deliberate political weaponization. It's kind of a sad moment when an entire party has talked itself into believing something that is not true, and at the same time it's turning a blind eye to the actual weaponization that is taking place here. We're lawyers. Legal process really matters. look at the Mar-a-Lago documents case. They went through a grand jury. They took their search warrant before a judge. In all of the legal quarreling of all of his lawyers fussing about that prosecution, they never found one violation of DOJ procedure, one shortcut that those prosecutors took. They may not have liked the end result, but in terms of process, those prosecutors followed the rules and the procedures very scrupulously. Then you've got these clowns coming in and literally manufacturing a criminal case in order to seize funds, getting shot down by judges, having to fire career prosecutors or drive them out, to be more exact, not able to get a career person's signature. They never had a problem getting a career person's signature on any of the pleadings in the Trump cases. You just put the two of them side by side, and there's absolutely no comparison when you look at the objective difference of what was done step by step and how diligently the Garland DOJ followed the rules.
I think that's exactly right. And what's more, I would also add that the Republicans don't really contest the underlying facts. So I've never heard a Republican in our committee, for example, say, the president never had boxes of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. The president never sought to obstruct the investigation. They didn't try to hide the documents from the department. They didn't lie. They never try to make those factual arguments because they know the facts are clear.
Yeah.
And similarly, they don't
photographically proven.
They don't try to say the president didn't incite people to attack the Capitol. They don't try to suggest that the president ever tried to affirmatively stop the violence at the Capitol. Even the Stormy Daniels stuff. I've never heard Republicans say, I don't believe the president paid Stormy Daniels. They don't disagree with the facts. So what is left to them but the generic argument, oh, well, he's the only president to be a convicted felon. He's the only president to have been multiply indicted. Therefore, it must be because the department has been weaponized, justice has been weaponized. No, actually, sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. He's the only serial lawbreaker we've had in the Oval Office. There's a reason he's been multiply indicted. But
and they go straight to the slogan. You're exactly right. They don't stop along the way at the facts. They don't stop along the way at the law. It's just into the bucket it goes of weaponization, weaponization, weaponization. And it's frustrating when you see real weaponization is happening, and they've kind of inoculated themselves with all this talk about weaponization, so that if we came in and said, wow, Trump has weaponized the Department of Justice against X, Y, or Z, it's gotten to be kind of a stale narrative. It's, both sides are accusing the other, mutual finger-pointing situation.
I do think along those lines that Trump's argument to the country is the same kind of argument you hear from a lot of despots and would-be despots around the world. And it's not an argument that says that he's not corrupt. It's an argument that says everyone is corrupt. It's just that I'm your crook. I'm your crook. I'm on your side. I'm a crook, but I'm your crook. That seems to be the Trumpian argument. But, again, comparing past and present, the utter lawlessness that we see now, not just at the Department of Justice, but widespread the corruption that we see. I lay a lot of this at the foot, I know as you do, of the Supreme Court and of that immunity decision.
Yeah.
That immunity decision by Roberts, which gives the president absolute immunity for wrongdoing he commits through the Department of Justice, accounts for their brazenness with that department. But also, the plain deal they're trying to consummate with Gutter and the meme coin and all this stuff. They have no worry about ever being held accountable again, thanks to Justice Roberts. So the other day when he was talking about his concern over the rule of law breaking down, it's like, really? Really? I wonder how that happened.
Gee, let me see. Flooding dark money into our democracy, giving an established criminal president an unprecedented presidential immunity. By the way, for those of you who are not constitutional experts, there actually is immunity in the U.S. Constitution for elected officials, but it's Congress. Congress is given immunity because the founders feared that we would be the subject of false prosecution and arrest by an aggressive executive branch. They specifically put immunity for members of Congress into the Constitution. So they were obviously thinking about immunity. So when they didn't put in presidential immunity, that's an omission that is pretty telling. It wasn't that they overlooked it, and now Chief Justice Roberts needs to solve for that problem all these years later. No, he just made it up for this president.
Yeah, I keep thinking of Justice Sotomayor's words in that opinion that this new immunity now lies about like a loaded weapon, because it really does. And not only does the president feel beyond any justice, recourse, but all those around him.
And the guns are going off.
Yes,
the loaded
they
guns
are.
are now
Yes,
going
they
off.
are. Yes, they are.
And Janine Pirro is going to come in and fix everything, clear the decks.
Yes, because the last Fox News appointee did
It's
so
been such
well
a success
at the Defense Department. Yes, I know.
Well, I think we're getting towards the end of our time. Let me thank you very much, Adam, for joining us. I could not be happier to have you in the Senate, and I could not be happier to have you on the Judiciary Committee. And I apologize if I sometimes steal your best questions before they get to you. But you really do an exemplary job. There are plenty of folks who are lawyers in the Senate and play at being lawyers, but you could go out and succeed as a very, very capable lawyer just on legal skills alone. So I'm delighted that you're here. Just a closing word on the law firms that capitulated, speaking of going out and working at law firms. How bad is that?
It's awful. This is certainly not the shining moment in the legal profession. The number of firms that have capitulated, those that have come rushing to the White House to cut their deals, of course, are now finding that they have no deal at all. They're not dealing with an honorable person. If they were, they wouldn't have to go rushing to make a deal. And so they purchased nothing for the sacrifice of their integrity.
Yeah.
And for firms that have made the argument, well, we're not agreeing to do anything we wouldn't do to begin with, that's utter nonsense. They will be forced to take on clients they would never represent, to advocate for causes they would never wish to advocate for. They will shy away from taking on clients that are adverse to the administration. It's already had that kind of
smart
effect.
client will shy away from them.
Yes. Yes.
Who, if you are a client who may have a cause of action against the federal government, would want to go to a law firm that has proven in real objective space and time its willingness to capitulate to the government.
I think similarly with the universities, that those that have tried to cut a deal are going to lose the respect of the American people, and those that are going to stand up, like Harvard is now doing, will inspire others to courage. I think, frankly, it's a lesson for all of us watching what the universities and law firms are going through right now. The only way to address this climate of fear is with courage.
Yeah.
By banding together and standing up for our freedom of speech and association, in a legal practice to be able to represent the clients we choose to represent, whether causes are popular or unpopular, an idea that goes back at least as far as John Adams when he took on that very deeply unpopular case. I'm really proud of firms like Jenner & Block, for example, and I love their website that says Jenner stands firm. Good for you, Jenner & Block.
Yeah.
But for those firms that came in capitulating, that will buy no peace and only shame. And
once he's made you crawl, he will keep you crawling.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Adam Schiff.
Thank you. Great to be with you.